my friend Nate Hile of the channel Grail Country, and we're here to talk about love. It's, we're talking about the lover, which is letter 6 in Tombergs' meditation of Tarot, and we're here to discuss the chapter. I found it very interesting. I like the reasons you told me before why you picked it, and I think it had a lot of different points, but the beginning point on love is something that stood out to me because it's a very interesting quality of love, and I'd like to explore it with you. So thanks for coming on.
Well, thanks, James. What struck you about what Tomberg says about love in this chapter? Where would you like to go with this?
Well, I got a little bit of notes I kind of made in the margins here. So the theme of the book is chastity, right? And this type of chaste love or chaste love. So a quote he says here. So at chastity, a word that came up to me, he doesn't use this, is anti-alienation, or the inverse of alienation, right? And I think it's so poignant in our time. The kind of the fundamental feature of subjectivity at our time is alienation from home, from family, from country, from kind of everything that we used to kind of feel a little bit of a semblance of home. But chastity, another kind of note I wrote down, reconciliation. It's this ontological love, this love of God, this unconditional love that it's fundamental, it's metaphysical, it's ontological. It has an effect, a substantial effect when it's shared, right? What are some other terms you can think of this love? Like, I want to kind of get at the root of what it means. It's like, it's God's love for us, essentially.
Well, it's a whole picture of love. Like, that's one of the things he spends quite a bit of time talking about, is that, like, where we get ourselves in trouble is when we cut it up into pieces, and then we over focus on an aspect of it. He uses the analogy of of the kind of love he's talking about is the love that would be all of the possible colors of white light, as opposed to, say, if someone is just focused on arrows, like Freud, who's the example he uses in this book. It's just like, it's only the red, and you're taking that to be the whole.
I like that distinction that he kind of makes there. Here's a little quote that I think is wonderful to talk about this type of love. He says, now to feel something as real and the measure of its full reality is to love. It is love which awakens us to the reality of ourselves, to the reality of others, to the reality of the world, and to the reality of God. Insofar as we love ourselves, we feel real, and we do not love as much as ourselves other beings who seem to be us less real. So he's talking about this, and that note that I made here is love collapses the simulation into the real, right? Love is a reconciliatory function that is available for us, right? And he goes into the Hindu idea of, what the self is. The self is an illusion. So the idea is to merge into Maya, right? And through kind of indifference, said there is no self. It's to efface the self and become one with the Maya, with the illusion, juxtaposed to this Christian love, which is love of self, and love neighbor as self, right? And this love is actually ontological, and it's fecund. It creates, it builds, it unifies. He calls it a living unity. Sorry, go ahead.
No, he points out how Christianity goes beyond Vedanta, because yes, there is a higher self, but that alone is inadequate. Like, that you have to get to the place where the other becomes real to actually have true love. So that, like, to have the fullness that I really think that, like, idea of understanding the way he's talking about love, and ontological was the right word when you use that word, because he's talking about it's in the fullness. And that's what allows you to experience the fullness of being.
He says, another quote, he says, for love is not an abstract program, but rather it is substance and intensity. So it's the stuff the world's made out of, essentially. It's very interesting. And then, where does this love come from? This deep love come from, and what happened? How come it's not readily accessible to us? Of course, he brings in the fall, right? And it's the love between Adam and Eve, which he relates to the love of self and neighbor. He says, who is this neighbor? Right. And right after he
Right.
says that, he goes into the fall of Adam and Eve, and, the oneness that was broken between Adam and Eve, right? Reconciliation there reunifies the whole reality, in a sense. So the actual solution to the fundamental problem of alienation in our time is this love. And it's this restitution or reconciliation between self and neighbor, right?
The way he talks about the neighbor reminded me a bit of Ivan Illich, because for him, it's like the neighbor is the one who becomes the true other for you,
Mm-hmm.
the one who you come to see as real as yourself, so that so where you're able to get out of that trap where you see yourself as more real than the other. For Tomberg, that's what he's suggesting. That's who the neighbor is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, he says love is the reality of the other, right?
Right.
The other is a very popular phrase in the 20th century in the psychological space, right?
Yes.
So and there's the problem within man is the problem between man and neighbor, right? I think they're fundamentally two sides of the same coin. The individual psyche is split, and then there's a split between the relationships between self and other, or self and neighbor, in a sense. So all schools, whether they're atheistic, psychoanalytic, conform to this problem, that there is a split, there is a divide, there is a sin in the center of human consciousness, and it's also in the world. They're both there, right? So the thing is, what is it that can heal this rift, right? And it's this type of love which makes things real, makes people real. Like,
right.
Think of a spiritual father, a confessor, or a true confessor. That love, it expiates sin. That love of God through that person, right? So this is forgiveness. It's a type of love that it builds community.
Right.
Where do
that's agape in the way that John Vervaeke talks about it when he talks about agape as a person making a force. That's precisely what we're talking about, and it's a person making a force because it's what it does. It renders the other actually real.
Mm-hmm. So what is the other
illusory.
outside of this relationship of being actually real? Like, so what is it that most of our relationships are made out of?
Right.
I don't know. Like, that's what simulation is, a new word for a very old problem. A matrix, we live in the matrix, is a new nomenclature for a perennial problem of alienation, I think. Right.
Yes.
We use these terms, but they're not new notions. They're fundamental and they're foundational. He also goes into this little paragraph here talking about this nature of love, this fractal nature of love that is between the love of the parents of a child, right? And
right.
The love the parents have for that child is reflected into the child and that child's relationship with himself and his peers, right? And then himself, his peers, and his teachers and his priests, and it fractally patterns out. But it's this initial love that's how this love gets into us, through us, is through each other. So it's God's love flowing through us, right? So that's, I think, what we see what marriage is thought of these days, and the divorce rate. Not even
marriage is an important word here, because for Tomberg, what he says is that all of those loves fractally flow out of that kind of like whole Adam Eve love, which is that complete, all embracing love of the other, so that the boundary between the self and the other is essentially blurred.
How about let's play devil's advocate. So yeah, I hear you. I think that sounds great. I would love that to be the case for me, my neighbors, and my family. That's great. Let me do it. So how do I do that?
Yeah, you can't will it.
It's like you can't will it. So
yeah,
there's no so if somebody would say that,
that's what grace is for.
Yeah. Well, if you're cynical, that's what the problem. Everybody's trying to cover up this fundamental alienation by buying stuff and having sex, being promiscuous, whatever it may be, is always trying to cover up this problem. This problem can never be covered up. It's inherent.
But they never actually. But those are all pseudo satisfiers, though. They never really resolve the problem.
there's nothing. I'm playing devil's advocate. There's nothing that really resolves the problem. We need to stop looking. We need to, cope or think differently about our plight in the world. Which, it's
so distract yourself until you die.
Yeah, and yeah, with through the the cardinal function of your libido, right?
Right.
So he says here, so he juxtaposed this love. So again, I like how this idea of what he's talking about here is disclosing through examples. So he gets into the idea of what this love is not. And so he says we have Freud in the libido, like you mentioned earlier, right? Which is kind of the sexual drive that's sublimated into the creative force through human beings. He says that particular form of love, the libido, is one color in the spectrum, white light being this ontological love that we're looking to explore here, right?
Right.
And then he goes and he reflects on the way that we understand ourselves through history. So he brings in Homo sapiens. He says Marx came about, and he said the fundamental nature, the matter of things is economic. So we became Homo economist, right? So economic man. Freud came, we became homosexualis, sexual man. Adler came and said we're Homo postissus, power man, so the will to power, right? And then Jung, he brings in here that we became Homo religious, right? So this idea of how we kind of understand ourselves has been changing, and then he talks about, he goes into right after this conversation or this exploration, he goes into out of nowhere, says how the Bible is the absolute truth and the fullness of the truth. And he says, if anybody looks, you'll just see it. Yeah. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes, he does. Well, he's talking about like that you can internally access the reality of the Eden story.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
This is, I think, and this was interesting to me. I really love this bit, and I almost did a video on just this bit because I wanted to do a video about how this bit entirely explains why people gravitated toward Jordan Peterson's biblical series.
Mm-hmm.
Because that is what Peterson was doing, particularly in Genesis, was he was demonstrating the truth of what Tomberg says here. Of course, mm-hmm. Tomberg said this like well before Jordan Peterson was a blip on the radar, but he had a sense of how it has to be resonant with people, because in order for you to deny the truth of that story, you have to deny the reality of your own experience.
Which is the case for a lot of people in the age of nihilism, right?
Right.
And all of a sudden, there was ears to hear this message that was coming through Jordan Peterson, right? He spoke the language of, the psychological reflections on the Bible, right? So he spoke the language that needed to be spoken, but the fact that all these people started listening, right? It registered with people for some reason, right? And
well, not many people have read Tomberg, so I mean, right, or Jung for that matter. Mm-hmm. So good point. It was the first time a lot of people were ever hearing Genesis presented that way. It's like, wait a minute, this isn't a piece of history about something that happened a long time ago. This is actually something that's a universal paradigm that applies directly to my own experience. I never thought of it that way before. Mm-hmm. But once you see that, it's obvious, which is what Tom says. Go ahead and deny it if you can deny it verbally, but your own experience will tell you that it's true.
Here, let me read that passage real quick.
Yeah, sure, go for it.
He says, now it is in we ourselves that there is to be found the Eden layer, or that of paradise in the fall, of which an account is found in the book of Genesis of Moses. Do you doubt the essential truth of this account? Descend into the depths of your own soul, descend as far as the roots, to the source of feeling, will, and intelligence, and you will know. You will know, i.e., you will have the certainty that the biblical narrative is true in the most profound and authentic sense of the word, in the sense that you must deny yourself, deny the witness of the most inner structure of your own soul in order to be able to doubt the intrinsic truth of Moses's account. It's it's pretty well put.
Yeah, it's very well put. And it's like, I mean, this is an experience we all have. It's like when you listen to a piece of music that's so beautiful that it makes you weep, the reason that happens is because it fills you with this longing for something that you know is lost and seems beyond your grasp. That's what causes the weeping reaction.
Yeah. So the psychoanalytic response to that is that it's an illusion that there was this plenary utopian or paradisical reality that we
Why
need to
would
get
that be
away from.
universal?
Well,
What's the purpose of a universal illusion?
well, it's to I hear you, right? So I hear you, but they'll say that they have to acknowledge that it's there, that there's
Right,
this
right.
perception, there's this imprint of paradise lost. But they say
Yes.
that the attempt to retain this paradise is what causes, like, is the function of the power, is the function of power getting out of control in a sense, right? So I'm not saying I agree with this, but they say we need
Right,
to
right,
move
right.
away from this sense origin story because it's an illusion or it served its purpose. But we've seen that power takes hold of this notion and kind of becomes out of control. So I don't know why I'm playing devil's advocate there.
No, it's fine. It's
But I
fine.
totally disagree with that. Like, it's not logical from a, just scientific logical perspective that this imprint, this memory is this particular memory of how things were, is a lost memory. Like this, you know what I'm saying? This particular
Right.
thing that is universal. Why would that be, a lost memory? Why would that be an illusion? That you can,
And there's no, and you have no, and there's no, I mean, honestly, there's no, you can't verify the claim that it's an illusion,
no.
right?
Yeah.
It's a not, it's not it's a falsifiable claim.
Yep.
So it's like, okay, so you're going to make a non-falsifiable claim and then expect me to go against my own undeniable experience based on your claim. Why?
Yeah. Well, yeah. Yeah. I'm with you.
You haven't given me much warrants
Yeah.
to
Yeah.
do that.
Yeah. I'm with you. I guess they'd say you can't prove a negative. Like,
Right.
there's no spaghetti monster. You know what I'm saying? Like,
Right. Right.
so it's, I think we get into, it's a category mistake to argue that because it's
But
a
we're not
category
talking
mistake.
about a spaghetti monster here.
Yeah.
We're talking about something that is universally part of the human experience that we all like. This is part of how we experience life. We all have that feeling.
Yeah. Yeah. I agree. I don't think it can be, like we're talking about this, what Tomberg just articulated beautifully perfect here. You can't argue that with someone and talk them into it.
Right. And he's not much interested in polemic.
Yeah. Yeah.
At all.
But it's just an
So
interesting aside, I think,
yeah.
Of how true conversion really happens there. But he gives
Yeah.
a nice template here, right? Go look
Yeah.
yourself into the depths where will and intellect, and desire form. I mean, that was powerful.
Well, that's how he thinks, that's how he thinks that you approach like any kind of like overly rigid thinking. Like we just did a conversation on chapter or our letter 11 on force, and what he talks about how to overcome, like, when people are trapped in a rigid mental system. He's
Mm-hmm.
like, basically he says the only thing to do is to soften them, right? You have to approach them. You have to take an emollient approach in order to soften that. Like if you try to resist force against force,
Mm-hmm.
you're using the wrong kind of force, because paradoxically, the way Tomberg interprets force is it's actually associated with the power of the virgin.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So
Which in chastity is a big part of that. Is a big part
yes,
of that.
right. This is why I brought it up in connection with this chapter, because that's on love, and he's also talking about chastity in connection with love.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's wonderful. So how does this idea of the serpent come, right? So the idea is what happened with Adam and Eve, right? They were tempted by a serpent. Now he says that you can't deny the truth of the story, Moses' story in Genesis, but you can not, question the, he talks about the apple or the fruit, the tree, he says these are all symbolic. Doesn't mean that they're not real, but
Right.
they're methods of expressing this fundamental event that happened that led to us human beings being where they're at, right?
And it's still happening.
Yeah. And he's giving an idea. So what happened? What is this force that keeps us from this ontological love that drew us into falling and keeps us from it? What is it?
Well, it's the serpent. And not in this chapter but later on he essentially says that the motive of the serpent is to create a world that is a closed circle.
Mm-hmm.
So he can, and he talks about the serpent like basically self-propelling by and uses the symbol of the Ouroboros to illustrate that, where the serpent is swallowing its own tail and
Mm-hmm.
propels itself through the, basically as like it's like, you know, like those little child's toys where the circle on and the stick.
Mm-hmm.
So that the idea is closing God from the circle and perpetual motion.
Yeah. He says there's a quote here where he speaks exactly to that, where he says, where is it? Let's see. He talks about how it's this automatic process, all right, the self-perpetuating automatic process. So the symbol of the serpent is used in the garden. What are some symbols in our everyday life that we can think of that function this way, right?
A lot of stuff in our world today.
Yeah, but that has this certain form, right? This certain circulating form. It's a repeating thing. I think in there's a big, Freud's big discovery. And sorry, I've been reading a lot of psychoanalysis lately, so I'm
no
bring
problem.
it back to that. The discovery of the 20th century was the death drive, right? That's a lot of people say that, the death drive, right? The death drive is this drive that where human beings get off on their own destruction, right? And this death drive is at the center. It's like the inverse of the pleasure principle. And this death drive, it reminded me of this idea, the serpent, of these habits that destroy your life, but they feel good. They're like passions, and that's just we're talking about the function of sin, the function of addiction, the function of bad habits that deteriorate your life, is a quality, is a fractal manifestation of this of the serpent eating its tail.
Right.
I don't know how that, for one to think of how we can use that information in terms of the reconciliation process, right? Or the ontological love. Is there a way to appropriate that? So I think it gets into intellectual kind of paradoxes there that where grace needs to be, So yeah. What else you want to get into here? I have
let's talk about, like, as we're talking about the fall, I actually think that some of the things that he says about the process of the temptation of the fall is interesting. Let me go ahead and grab that.
Yeah, exactly. That's what I was trying to get at here, but I forgot that little part.
No problem.
Yeah. It's 132.
My PDF is different page numbers, so that won't help me.
Yeah. This is the temptation.
Oh, here we go. Yeah. Okay, so yeah, go ahead if you want to read it. If you got to it first, go for it. Yeah, the temptation in paradise was threefold. That's the part that I was looking for.
Okay, yeah. Temptation in paradise was threefold, just as the temptation of Jesus Christ in the wilderness. The following are the essential elements of the triple temptation in paradise, as it is described in the account of the fall in the book of Genesis. 1, Eve listened. It's in italicized. Eve listened to the voice of the serpent. She saw that the tree was good for food and that it was delight to the eyes. She took of its fruits and ate, and she also gave some to her husband, and he ate. And he goes a little bit further. He says, the voice is the serpent. The voice of the serpent is that of the living being, animal, whose intelligence is most advanced, the most artful amongst all living beings, animals whose consciousness is turned towards the horizontal, right? So giving us more clues of what is this force, what is this nature. What do you think about those three points that he outlined? Eve listened, she saw, and she took.
Well, the fact that Eve listened is interesting to me, because to me that's like, you can see he illustrates this a little bit later. He says what he means there, but you can see that the consciousness is already divided because there's a listening to a voice other than the voice of God. So there's already so even in the act of listening to the voice of the serpent, the fall has already begun.
So how do you think that plays out, right? Do you think that this listening is faint, and then the more you listen, it becomes more intense, and then you get further into it? It's like, well, Why
I think
do
it's
Adam
divided.
and Eve have
I
faculties to
think
listen to that?
right. I think it is related to just our divided perception, to our subject object duality. Like I think that's like, because I think that's what it means to listen to a voice other than God, is to begin to see that you begin to first it begins by hearing, but
Mm-hmm.
then eventually, because that's what the tree of the knowledge of good and evil is. It's the tree of duality. That's what
Mm-hmm.
it offers, is
Mm-hmm.
duality. So that the beginnings of the first perception of duality is to hear a voice other than the voice of God,
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
as if there were any other voice to be heard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah. That makes sense. So what else? What else about this notion of the fall stood out to you here?
Well, what's interesting is he goes to great. He takes this idea of this horizontal principle. He takes it to a very interesting place, because he essentially attributes biological evolution to this principle, that operates like merely along the horizontal. Is creation without grace is actually the phrase that he uses.
Mm-hmm.
And that survival of the fittest principle is a reflection of that horizontal of that horizontal element without any presence of the vertical.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And then later on, not in this chapter, but later on, he introduced this idea of like a counter movement to that, which is that's opposed to this survival of the fittest, which is the cooperation for existence. And he obviously was a plant lover,
Mm-hmm.
because he most often uses illustrations from the plant kingdom to illustrate what he's talking about in terms of this like this kind of counter movement,
Mm-hmm.
that shows that the presence of grace has not ceased to operate,
Mm-hmm.
even though there's and he oh I don't and I think it is actually in this chapter, correct me if I'm wrong, this is this chapter where he says the end goal of it is the Superman, the Antichrist,
Mm-hmm.
the
Yeah, that's when it
egregore
gets
of
into the
humanity.
egregore. Yeah,
Yeah.
ultimately, is the
So
egregore is culminating or emerging through this horizontal evolutionary
yeah, it
process.
would be that's the end goal of the process.
Yeah, and and it's interesting to speak to your point. How what is the solution to this? Right? He says at the end of this chapter, he says, so Christ is tempted three times, and then right after the third temptation, what happens? Says, then the devil left him, and behold, angels came and ministered to him immediately after this, not during,
Right.
not before, right? So this idea of this world of cooperation is a world with the angels, or living in a way which is more angelic in a sense of this
Yes.
cooperation, right? So I think it's interesting to that distinction of right when the temptation was over, like right as a person fractally, if you deal with temptation or whatever it is, in dealing with it, right, you thrive right after, right? So you trust the process, and then your life gets better after. There's so many ways to kind of understand that.
Well, yes, right, and it reopens you back up to. I mean, the angels are the ultimate representatives of the vertical dimension, right? Because
Mhm.
they're the elements of the vertical dimension that are ascending and descending.
And those are the
Jacob's
models.
ladder,
Those are models that reflect cooperation, right? And
right?
while as the models on the horizontal plane are competition and survival of the fittest, right?
Right.
It's an interesting kind of distinction there. Um, what do you think about, so when he talks about the Antichrist, or the culmination of evolution on without a vertical sense or without a spiritual sense, is the culmination of the Antichrist? I don't know if he says this here, but do you think he's thinking of the Antichrist kind of manifesting itself through our tools,
I
through the
think
machine
so.
world?
I think that's I can't help but see it that way. It seems implicit, because especially once you read letter 10, the Wheel of Fortune, where he goes into in depth in this idea of the the closed loop world that the serpent tries to create versus the open spiral, which is, so like the serpent tries to create a world without Sabbath, a world without any room for the divine, with no room for the vertical element. And that seems like, but it still wants it to be a perfection of on its own terms.
Mm-hmm.
So that seems to be exactly what we're trying to do. We're trying,
Mm-hmm.
we think that we can create a better world on our own.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And so we want to close the circle because it's like, you know, we don't like the world as it is, and
Mm-hmm.
we think that we can do better.
Which is and that because of our memory of better ultimately,
Right, right.
but when
So
once you
instead of
disavow the memory, yeah.
right, yeah. So instead of choosing the path of being reconciled to that and accepting grace, we're like, nah, we'll just make it better on our own.
Yeah, the whole thing wasn't right, and
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
like
And
what
we
it,
convince ourselves that and we convince ourselves of things like, well, that's probably not real anyway, you
mm-hmm.
know.
Yeah, superstition and whatnot. But
Yeah, right.
it's wild to think that we're living in a drama where there was a powerful being and a powerful not as powerful being, and that powerful being leaving and creating the world, right? The prince of this world, right, created this world that we all of a sudden emerged in, and there's this
Right.
dispute between these two levels of reality. It's a bonkers if you think about it. Like that's actually happening, is that there's this
Right.
drama between a fallen angel and the rest. Like that is it's a quite a thing to behold, that we live in such a psycho drama, such a cosmic drama. That's quite beautiful.
But we can see these principles at work. These,
Mm-hmm.
those cosmic principles are at work. I mean, you can kind of think about them in whatever terms you want, right? I mean, if you want to try to, like, say, put the language of the ancients into a more, modern idiom, I mean, you can do that if you want, but it's still, the principles are still correct. That struggle is still happening. um and it doesn't look like it's going that well right now,
Yeah, it sure doesn't. I think
but
there are times where it looks good, where it's like, oh man, this is a paradise that we finally found it. Like, has any generation really been satisfied? You think?
no, we couldn't be.
Yeah. So it's always this kind of bleak. It's always this alienation, no matter
Well,
what. Now we're the
because we can't
richest.
be satisfied with anything less than God.
Yeah.
So I mean, which is the only way that we can be satisfied is by opening the circle back up,
Yeah. Definitely. That
making
makes
room
it
for
even.
God, making room for Sabbath.
Yeah. And I guess you have to do it. You can only do it individually, or your small cell around you. Because once you start thinking about that in terms of the world, maybe because it's a fallen world, right? So anytime you think, oh yeah, maybe people just started really believing in God and helping each other and loving their neighbor, oh, if that just happens now, and everybody already knows that's what should happen essentially. Like so, and when you look out into the world, like, oh, that's not going to happen. So it gets bleak, you know.
There
Uh,
was a hymn. There was a hymn we sung in church. I was trying to remember the hymn. It wasn't one that I remembered singing before, but there was a line in the hymn that really resonated with me, and I don't remember it exactly, but the gist of it was that once enough people see, the Redeemer will come, right? So that there's a point, like, so there is still, like, no, we shouldn't be trying to build a utopia, but we should be helping as many people be able to see and hear as possible, and that enough people seeing and hearing is part of the equation. Like, it's like that it happens in response to something that happens here, even if it's not a utopian project,
mhm.
but it is. I think that the role of the church is primarily, um well, it's an educative role primarily.
Yeah.
um
I
and
think
that,
it's yeah. I'm
yeah,
sorry. Yeah.
yeah, no, I mean, it's an educative role.
Yeah,
And
it's
the best way for it to fulfill that educated role is by example.
yeah, exactly. That's kind of what I was thinking as well, right?
Right.
Is to become an example of it. You know, it's not going to happen through talking about it, right? You can't, you know, but people have to experience it, and you don't have to talk someone into your particular belief system for them to, you know, have the ears to hear. It doesn't
That's
have,
really
they don't have to
important.
agree with, you know what I'm saying, with your particular
Well, that
interpretation of the
yeah,
story.
yeah, right. That emphasis on polemic has been a huge mistake, I think. And um and just in general thinking it's about like having the right set of um
Propositions, right? Yeah.
propositions. I really think that's a mistake. I actually I said something about this on Twitter the other day because it's like one of the younger members of my estuary group shared a video that Akira the Dawn had done, like looping something that Vervaeke had said a long time, and I never saw it because it's just not my kind of thing. I'm a country music kind of guy.
Mm-hmm.
But um there was something that he said that I hadn't quite noticed before. I mean, I'd heard all the words that were in that loop before, but there was something that he said that I didn't quite notice that was subtle. He had this weird caveat where he said when he's talking about this religion that is not a religion concept, and he has this weird caveat where he says, "Well, at least not in an axial age way." And I actually think he's right about that because if you look at um, Barfield essentially traces the beginnings of the withdrawal of participation to the axial age. Like obviously, like it wasn't as advanced; it was a more participatory age than ours. But you can see the dawnings of the beginning of. It's definitely different from the Bronze Age consciousness, and certainly different from the Paleolithic consciousness, etc.
Mm-hmm.
You can see the beginnings of the withdrawal of participation in that axial age, and I think so. This is why I think Vervaeke's right, is because as we essentially the legacy of the religions of the axial age has been to try to formulate systems and arguments
Mm-hmm.
and has not been sufficiently participatory. I
Yeah.
think
What do you mean?
Christianity is different though.
Mm-hmm.
So this is why my position has always been that the religion that is not a religion is Christianity and
Yeah.
always has been Christianity. It's just that Christianity has been understood in these more shallow ways because it's kind of the default. It's the cultural default. And modernity made this like particularly pronounced. Like it peaked terrible for understanding Christianity was the modern age because well the withdrawal participation was reached its peak. But I think this is something. This is the positive note. This is the good thing that's happening. In all the bad is that I definitely see signs that is breaking down
Mm-hmm.
and shifting, and people are like more and more people are starting to wake up and to realize that this like kind of Cartesian world that they've inherited from modernity is wrong.
Mm-hmm.
And people are starting to have these radical paradigm. More and more people are starting to have these radical paradigm shifts in their thinking. And as that happens, then I think that we can like that Christianity can begin to go deeper within itself,
Mm-hmm.
right?
It's,
Moved
it's,
by its own final cause to become what it's always had the capability of being.
mm-hmm.
So I see that there's the opportunity for the church to move into a new and better version of itself. As long as it doesn't, I see aspects of the church that want to fight against this trend
Mm-hmm.
because they're very comfortable with the idiom of modernity, but it's a mistake.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mistake. The church needs to embrace it because that is the thing that will enable the church to move further into what its own pattern.
So the new age, just like the Bronze Age is different than the Paleolithic, right? The axial
Yeah,
age is the age where Christ came, right? It was where the religion that ended all religions, Christianity came, right?
pretty much.
It's
Yeah,
not going to
it's
look
like
the same.
it's at the end of
Yeah.
the axial age. Yeah,
So it's not going to look like it did, you know, back at the beginning, or the beginning of the end of the axial age, right? Whatever Christianity is or will be will not look like it used to be, but it will still have these fundamental founding principles, which, by the way, almost everybody agrees with, right?
Right.
Pretty much everybody agrees with as part of the very structure of our culture, in a sense. But those need to become real again, right? Those
Right.
need to become real again, and
Embodied, incarnated. That's why this is why Christianity that's what specifically, it's this idea of incarnation.
Mhm.
And among other things, the incarnation and resurrection make Christianity go to a place that the other axial age religions couldn't go. Like, it has within it like the seeds to include more, is the best way I could put it. It's a
Mhm.
bigger bucket. There, Wolfgang Smith had a really great line in his. Did you see Wolfgang Smith's conversation with John Vervaeke on Karen Wong's channel?
Oh, I don't think so. No.
Okay, so he was talking about the relationship between Christianity and the perennial philosophy, because he's, as a young man, he spent a long time in India and studying Vedanta. And what he said is that although Christianity can contain Christianity is a container large enough to contain the perennial philosophy, essentially, it doesn't
Mhm.
work the other way around.
Mhm.
Christianity is actually it's larger than the, and most of the perennialists have been kind of stuck in Vedantic thought,
Mhm.
and have like ignored some of the nuances of Christianity, and have missed what's right there in front of them, because most of them came from the Christian world.
Mhm.
And actually, a lot of them were informed by implicitly Christian principles and reinterpreted Vedanta along Christian lines in a way that I don't think was necessarily true to Vedanta, because
Mhm.
of what Tomberg. There's a chapter where Tomberg talks about the radiating effects of the resurrection.
Mhm.
And he actually talks about, he specifically mentions how there was that after the resurrection, you actually have new traditions developing within the East even.
Mhm.
And he specifies Vedanta as one of those traditions, where it's like you have new ideas that come in because of the radiating effects of the resurrection, where Christianity really changes everything, even those things that it doesn't have direct contact with,
Mhm.
it still impacts.
Yeah. So in a sense, Vedanta is Christian now, right? It's
Right.
because it's Christianity transforms that which it encounters, right? And
Right.
it's not, so the old polemic way of thinking. So how could you say Christianity is true and Vedanta is not true? If you were born in India or whatever, you would feel one way, but you were born
Right.
here, so you're biased. So it's like those, like, Vedanta is true in a context,
Yeah.
in a hierarchy, in a place,
Right.
right. It's not Christianity is true rather than Vedanta. I said Christianity is the
No.
fullness of the truth, right?
Yeah. It's
And there are
Vedanta
many
plus.
instances of the logos. Yeah.
Yes.
So that's
Right.
yeah.
Because, yeah, right, exactly. Because Christ is the logos of all things and contains all things. The Vedantic truth is a subset of the Christian truth.
Yeah. So on that note, do you think, what will it look like? So the kind of question that came to my mind is John Vervaeke and Jonathan Pajot agree a lot. They resonate a lot, right?
Mm-hmm.
What do they disagree on, right? And does that matter? What is their
God is
fundamental
not
disagreement?
personal. The fundamental disagreement is God is not person for John.
Does that matter?
Does it depends on what you mean by does it matter? I'd say I'm in terms of does it keep John from seeing the fullness of the truth? Yes, it does. So like he has a lot of truth, and he is a pretty outstanding human being. And I but he's missing something by not
You
seeing that.
you said that you would have to propositionally believe in Christ the person, right?
No, he doesn't. He doesn't have to propositionally believe it, in my opinion.
No, I agree, right? But is that necessary?
Is it necessary to propositionally believe?
Yep.
No, because you share a nature with him.
So he's exhibiting Christ. He's actually, you know what I'm saying? Exhibiting the pattern that Christ gave to us in some sense, right? He's not willing to, take that verbal propositional leap and say, I believe, Christ, the truth is a person in a sense, but he embodies it more than most Christians. Same thing. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
I don't know the answer.
And the embodied part is no. The embodied part is the more important part. And I'm a universalist, so it's like I'm not worried about John's soul. But and I wouldn't want him to say that he believed it if he didn't either, right? So there's something fun like that, like saying, like refusing to say things that you don't believe are true is not a bad thing. Even if you're wrong, you should at least be honest about what you actually believe. So from that standpoint, it's like, if he doesn't believe it, I wouldn't want him to say it. I do think that, like, but I don't necessarily know that it's not his fault that he can't see it, though.
Or he can believe, right? He believes, or can you believe without knowing that you believe?
Yes, you can. You can, and your body actions will betray that sometimes. And sometimes you're, well, to use John's term, sometimes you're bullshitting yourself.
Yeah.
Right.
Or like belief, it seems like was necessary in the axial age, right? In this context, to believe in Christ and in the story, in a sense, in order to copy it, in a sense.
Yeah, but what actually is important?
It. What's important is now to embody it and to enact it, right?
Exactly.
So it's
to live out the pattern.
Yeah,
to live out the pattern. This is the Christianity that is a religion that is not a religion. Like that's the deeper version that I'm pointing toward. That's the thing, and the seeds of it are all there. I'll defend it from scripture and tradition, and without any hesitation, it's there if you're willing to see it. So here's what's interesting. Again, like I said, and it's not the fact that John doesn't see that, is he's curious about it. He dropped he dropped something, that there was a line that he dropped in the conversation with Pajot and Peterson that kind of got dropped, maybe because they didn't want to go into the weeds of talking about hypostasis. But John actually is the one who pointed in the direction of person and hypostasis as possibly being relevant to what they were talking about at the time. And then the conversation quickly moved in another direction. This is why I'm very curious. Like, I know that I had talked to him I mentioned before we started recording that I had a post office snafu with me not getting my pre-order of Jordan Daniel Wood's book in time. So I know I had, through a friend, gotten a advanced copy of the manuscript. I pre-ordered the book anyway, so it's like, and through a friend I got an advanced copy of the manuscript, which I also shared with John, and I know John is interested in talking about that. I will be very interested in seeing what John thinks after reading Jordan's book, because person and hypostasis are absolutely central to what Jordan is doing in that book.
So I think the problem is that the term here, person, right? Person, we think of as persona, mask that we put on. To say that the truth is a person, so you're saying the truth is a personality, the truth is an ego, like
it's
mine?
Not a person, it's person.
Yeah, it's person. So yeah, that's a very good point. It's a good distinction,
yeah.
Right? So, so the truth is person, and from what angle could someone with a sophisticated intellectually
I'll give you a really simple way of understanding this. Okay, so if there is no rational relational the kind of rational relational, fundamentally relational, by the way, this is part of, the fact that, like, we are relational and don't exist otherwise, like, there literally no man is an island is an ontological statement. You cannot exist except in relation. So we're fundamentally relational and we're rational. If there are no fundamentally relational or rational creatures, then the world of the physical layer may as well not exist, because it has absolutely no meaning or purpose. Like there's there's nothing. It's just nothingness. There's a way in which it doesn't actually truly exist unless there is person there to perceive it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean,
Now
the
that
observer
could be
problem, right?
God. That could be God alone at the beginning of the creation. It's still person like, and God is relational. This is why we believe, as Christians, we believe in God as a Trinity, right? There's no. I really strongly resist in the absolute monism.
So when you say persons, then persons, right? God is persons,
but they're one, fundamental
mm-hmm.
unity.
Yeah.
So
No,
I
I
don't know.
agree. I'm playing advocate a little bit here.
Oh yeah,
You
no
know,
problem.
yeah.
Did you see my conversation with JD Lionheart?
Was it on the apocalypse?
No, it's on the Trinity.
Oh, no, I don't think so.
Okay, so he wrote a book on the Trinity called Monotheism, and he makes a very interesting argument in that book. The argument that he makes in that book is that yes, the Trinity runs into a contradiction, but it is the same contradiction that you run into when trying to explain the universe.
Mm-hmm.
That they run
Yeah.
into the exactly the same contradiction, which is that it's very, very hard to account for becoming alone or being alone, and that you need to have both being and becoming involved in
Mm-hmm.
the genesis that of anything at all.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, because the being and the becoming is the duality, but there's the third, right?
Right, exactly. And he jumps from that, and he jumps from that into Trinitarian reasoning. And the fact that it's a seeming contradiction, like God is beyond being, right? And the law of non-contradiction only applies to things that you would say about beings,
Mm-hmm.
not the ground of being, not that which is beyond being, not being itself. It actually doesn't apply. So the fact that it violates the law of non-contradiction is not really a big deal. And anyone who spent any serious time like contemplating actual affinity would be able to grasp this. One of the things I like about his book is that he does all this in a very, very modern way that I think is and his book's very accessible. He wrote it in the form of a dramatic dialogue.
Yeah, but Pavel Florinsky, the brilliant mathematician, he wrote a lot about the triunity, the infinity and the Trinity, right? And he discusses. I mean, he was a brilliant mathematician. He discusses these different types of infinities, and he discusses this exact problem, the problem of the law of non-contradiction, right? So, which he puts at the root of the skeptic, the cynic kind of consciousness that we all have now, right? We fall into these regressions here, but it's not necessary if you can apprehend the Trinity.
Right, it's a useful tool for getting things done in the world.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I'm not suggesting that you should just toss it aside. There are lots of areas where it applies, but when you're actually talking about the divine, it just simply isn't applicable. So we have to rely on other things. And I would say intellectual intuitions and moral intuitions are the things that we need to rely on.
Because there are ways
and revelation.
Those are ways of sensing, but those are ways of sensing the revelation, right?
Yeah,
you got to cultivate the ears to hear.
Correct. Or in order to see the revelation, you have to. Yeah. That's why the hearing comes first. Both it comes first in both instances. Notice that in Tomberg's Order of Temptation, the hearing comes first, but also in the process of seeing, hearing comes first, because you have to be called in order to know what direction to turn.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's an interesting perspective there. If you think about it in terms of this third element that will heal my relationship, the relationship between self and neighbor and self and other. There's self, other, and a third that's there, right? That third is God, right? With the absence of God, the idea of the third doesn't go away. It becomes the master signifier, becomes the person supposed to know. It becomes the analyst. If you go to psychoanalysis, right? There has to be this third kind of force that situates subjectivity between self and other, right?
It's wherever two or more are gathered in my name, in my name is like, that's like that is a conceptually deep idea in the Bible. Like, to be in the name means to be joined to the essence of.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, participate in the identity
it,
of. Yeah,
it doesn't mean this reduction to like, you have to verbally say the name. No, to be in his name is to be interacting with one another in such a way that his essence is present.
it's being participating in that unconditional love and sharing it with others.
Exactly.
Yeah,
Right. It's an
our
ontological, it's an ontological thing. It's not propositional at all.
is our
It's
Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Right, our Father, hallowed be thy name. So it's not, again, it's a deep, deep, deep notion of this term name or onomas or identity. Right, if you
when
embody
hallowed
this,
is ultimately tied to wholeness too.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So yeah.
Well, good, man. We've gone about an hour and 15. My
Yeah,
kiddos are getting restless. I enjoyed it.
no
Anything else you
problem.
got?
Yeah,
Anything else you got?
I
What
think
else you got coming up?
that's a good little talk. We can. I'm going to Jordan Daniel Wood has given me a verbal agreement. So once I get my post office situation sorted, I will be having Jordan Daniel Wood on. I've also agreed to host a discussion of Jordan's book.
What's the book title?
It's called The Whole Mystery of Christ.
Why is it captured your attention so
Well,
beautifully? Looks like
Jordan is somebody that I've interacted with over the years, quite a lot. He's been very active. When he was a grad student, he was very active on the David Bentley Hart fan page, and he's David has mentioned him in the acknowledgments in some of his books, and I follow him on Twitter and read a lot of his stuff there.
very cool.
It's good if you're interested in Maximus. It's a great follow on Twitter because he's tweeting Maximus stuff all the time because that's his primary thing. He's a Maximus scholar.
Okay, I'll have to check
Yeah,
him
he
out.
definitely like is somebody that would fit your channel to talk to for sure.
Yeah, I wrote down. I'm gonna look into that book too. I saw it somewhere else too. So
Notre Dame
turned me on to some good stuff.
Notre Dame Press has the best deal on it if you buy it directly from Notre Dame Press.
Good deal.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank
you.
All right.
It's a pleasure like always. Till next time.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, James.
Take care. Yep.
You too.